Some states could begin to ease social distancing, but will there be enough testing? As the U.S. death toll tops 34,000, the catastrophe at nursing homes, the tip that led police to 17 bodies in one facility's tiny morgue. More than 5,600 residents dead across the U.S., families pleading for answers.
I want people to own up to their part in this, and I want him back.
The rising concern, are workers showing up sick? The staggering new toll, 22 million Americans filing for unemployment in just a month. The rescue fund for small businesses already out of money. The standoff in Congress over more money. The alarming impact, the new reporting, and how severely coronavirus could damage your brain. And Game On, the PGA announces its return, how other sports could make their comebacks in ways we've never seen before.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Nightly News!
Good evening,
Lester
everyone.
Holt.
Tonight we're at a gut check moment in our battle with the coronavirus and its impact on lives. More than 34,000 lost so far, and livelihoods. 22 million American jobs erased. President Trump tonight announcing a roadmap to rebooting the economy, unveiling guidelines that would keep schools closed, but envision returns to offices, the reopening of restaurants, theaters, churches, and gyms, all under strict conditions. But are we really there yet? Our team tackling it all tonight. First, Peter Alexander with those breaking developments from the White House. Peter, what do we know?
Lester, good evening. The president tonight laying out his recommendations for reopening the economy. The guidelines do not provide specific dates or locations, and they acknowledge that governors have the final say on what happens in their states. President Trump tonight outlining new federal guidelines for opening up America again. The president just days after insisting he has total authority to order states what to do. This afternoon telling all 50 governors, you're going to call your own shots. The White House announcing 3 phases to guide governors' decisions. Phase 1, urging all individuals when in public to maximize physical distance from others, and saying schools that are currently closed should remain closed. Phase 2, when non-essential travel can resume and bars and schools can reopen. And Phase 3, when Americans can largely return to their lives while minimizing time spent in crowded environments. Moving between phases for each state would require evidence the number of coronavirus cases has gone down for 14 days. And White House aides insist some states may be able to reopen before May 1st. The guidance addresses the need for testing and contact tracing, but it remains unclear how many tests will be needed and will be available for governors to feel comfortable reopening their states. The president today, pressed by Democratic lawmakers on the need for dramatically more testing, pushed back. According to one Republican senator, President Trump indicated that the economy would have to be reopened before widespread testing can be available. Peter Alexander, NBC News, the White House.
This is Gabe Gutierrez. From coast to coast, from New York and Boston to Orlando, Chicago, and Los Angeles, many cities are essentially ghost towns. Today, the calls to reopen America reach their loudest yet.
I don't think that the government really has any business telling us what we can and cannot do.
This protest in Virginia followed others this week in Michigan and North Carolina.
We're peacefully assembling. We have that right.
Today, the governors of 6 Midwestern states banded together to coordinate how and when they'd reopen. Ohio says its stay-at-home order will expire on May 1st.
I want to make a correction towards what that individual was saying, that he didn't believe that the governor had a right of telling individuals towards what to do. Well, you live down in Florida or South Carolina, North Carolina, or other coastal lying areas, and you have a Category 4 or 5 hurricane coming down through the pike, whenever they tell you to pick up stakes and go, if you don't go, that means they are not liable for anything that happens to you at that point. And to be quite honest with you, if you do reach a point, to the point that you have to call 911 in an extreme emergency like that, you can actually be charged for reckless endangerment because you didn't take heed to what the authorities told you to do. and you went against their policies, and now you're crying out for help, and you're endangering other people's lives because now they have to go and exhilarate themselves in that same atmosphere pertaining to a Hurricane 4 or a Hurricane 5 hurricane. Now, criminal charges can be reversed towards, instead of you having the right to sue the state, local or state government, now they have a right to where they can come back and bite you because now you've done put lives in danger because of your rebelliousness. So yes, sir, the governor of the states has the right to enforce a law if it is based around self-preservation pertaining to life and limb. Now, they can't just come, or I haven't never heard of no cases where they can just come and actually grab you up by the collar and drag you out of your own home and tell you you're going to come with us because it's not going to be safe. On that degree, I think the individual is right. But that's an extreme degree. But you keep in mind, whenever the governor has already put out a state of an emergency, you're under a completely different set of guidelines. Everything can change, depending upon the circumstances on a case-by-case basis. And, like I said, if deemed necessary while you're in the middle of your crisis, it doesn't matter if it's a 40-foot wave that now you're drowning and you're trying to seek help, or you got a bad fever because you think you got the coronavirus. If you contact an emergency first responder and you are willfully, listen to me, willfully endangering that person's life, knowing that you could have avoided your own life being in danger, then is whenever the proper authorities can put a charge on you for reckless endangerment and possibly even gross negligence, to the degree that if a first responder lost their life or got harmed real bad in the crisis of the crisis, you could actually possibly go to jail. The same thing as premeditated murder. Though it wouldn't have been intentional premeditated murder, but you still premeditated towards it. You was going to hunker down and you was going to stay in that crisis. And it don't matter what type of crisis that it is. It don't matter what type of crisis it is. If you have done this willfully, consciously, to the point that now you're putting other people's lives in danger, then the ball game changes. The rules of engagement changes. And instead of you having a right to sue the state because they didn't give you proper warning, now it's reversed to the point that you may actually be facing criminal charges. And it's the same way with any type of crisis. You know, if the government officials, that's their job, is to protect us and take care of us. And that's why we hire them. And if for some reason they have put out a warning and we don't take heed to that warning, then it's on us. What happens to the degree if they have predicted for a Category 5 hurricane to hit the east coast of Florida and it never occurs, and now you've disrupted 4 or 5 million people's lives? The consumer has to eat it, number one. But number two, at the expense of the consumer eating it, now because the authorities miscalled a shot at the end of their season, they can vote them out of office because obviously they didn't know what the shit that they was doing that made 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 million people pack up and move out of Florida temporarily for 4 or 5 days in the process of a hurricane. It's all case by case basis. And it doesn't matter if it's a coronavirus, it doesn't matter if it's a tornado, doesn't matter if it's a volcano, doesn't matter if it's a bad storm or earthquake. If they tell you to do something and you don't do it, then the burden of proof falls upon your shoulders. And like I said, hypothetically speaking, if you're asking somebody to come and rescue you, and you knowingly, willfully done this, you could be charged.
Safeguards.
The world that we're going to see is a different world. You're going to see people with masks. You're going to see people where there's a lot of sanitizers. The workplace is going to change.
Los Angeles and Washington, D.C. have already extended their stay-at-home orders until May 15th.
Now, I have another question. If it's going to change to the extent of inhaling somebody else's liquefied bodily fluids through the air, is the world going to change pertaining to all these teenagers that has all these sex parties that's transmitting sexual transmitted diseases from one group to another on a day-to-day, everyday level? Because the authorities know that creates a problem. And in some incidences, people actually have lost their lives on account of it. It has created cancer and everything else. It's kind of like them huffing gasoline or thinner in a rag, or it's kind of like them smoking a electrical cigarette and them not putting the warning signs telling you that this is dangerous. Whenever people tell you that something is dangerous, then you become a high risk if you automatically do that. It's kind of like airplane pilots. They have a high risk occupation. It's kind of like iron workers. They have a high risk occupation. It's kind of like people that drive race cars, regardless whether it's NASCAR or whoever. They have a high risk occupation. If you're an electrician and you work on power lines, you have a high risk occupation. And it hasn't been until just recently to the point that the nurses and the doctors now have a high risk occupation, because now if they're attending to somebody and they have something on them or in them that could transfer over to the doctor or the nurse, now they're considered high risk. That's a high risk. You become a high risk because you're trying to do something for the will of the people, depending upon your occupation. It's something how that the laws of the land have come in and dominated and dictated towards what we can do, what we can't do, what we should do, what we shouldn't do. It's kind of like backing up and pulling somebody out of a ditch. If I back up to pull somebody out of a ditch and I hook onto them and I pull their bumper off, they can sue me because I done damage to their automobile towards trying to do a good Samaritan deed towards pulling them out of the ditch. But now if I throw the rope down on the ground and they hook onto me and I jerk their vehicle in half, there ain't a darn thing they can do, because instead of me hooking onto them, they hooked onto me. See? It's that little bit of twist that makes all the difference in the world pertaining to, was it intentional? Was it non-intentional? Was it done ignorantly? Was it done consciously? Was it done subconsciously? I mean, you got all these case by case different factors that you got to look into it, weigh it out, and figure out what the heck is going on. I never would have thought a nurse, under normal circumstances, would have been considered a high risk. but here lately they have been. So yes, I do believe that people that are transmitting sexual transmitted diseases between one person to another, that this should put a brand new venue of do's and don'ts towards what you should, what you shouldn't do, what is acceptable, what isn't acceptable, why you done what you done. Was you ignorant of the fact? Did you knowingly know that you had HIV? Did you know that you was contaminated with the coronavirus? I mean, you have all these different issues in regard to trying to save people's lives or make people's lives more comfortable. And whenever people don't follow the rules, they get penalized. They get punished. Especially if they're not following the rules intentionally.
At the nation's COVID-19 epicenter, New York's governor today did the same.
What happens after then, I don't know. We will see depending on what the data shows.
Today, that data showed the daily death toll in New York fell for the second straight day. ICU admissions are dropping dramatically here, but the economic toll is mounting. Needy families lined up outside this Dallas food bank today. In Boston, Dr. Lakshman Swamy is worried about America reopening. His ICU is still packed.
It is terrifying to me to think about people congregating, to think about people being in the streets, to think about my kids in school again. Nothing scares me more.
About 2,000 Americans are dying from coronavirus each day. Among them, Kenneth Boswell of Rockford, Illinois. His wife says she lost the love of her life and had to say goodbye over FaceTime.
To be able to actually see him through a phone when he's going for his, the last moments, is so indescribable.
Well, once more, it's not necessarily in what you're looking at, but how that you're looking at it. She could have looked at that and said, thank God that there was a phone. Thank God that we did have technology to the point that I could at least observe and look at him as he was looking at me, as he was passing off into another world. And I realize her heartbreak. I realize that it's tough. It is tough. But, whenever you compact 150 people in a theater and they're elbow to elbow, or you put all these kids in a bus, 60 kids that's slobbering and doing whatever else that they do to one another. Kids will be kids. There are concerns whenever you have large groups, mass groups of people, either at a ball game or a NASCAR race or a professional football game or basketball game. There are concerns, and there should be concerns. And that's the reason why the doctors are raising a red flag right now in regard to people still practicing social distancing if they can. See, I think what to do in a theater, instead of having everybody sit elbow to elbow, they should skip a seat and still wear their mask and still have their hand sanitizers. If you're that dead set that you want to go see an open screen movie, instead of allowing for everybody to sit elbow to elbow, at least scoot them over to where they have a little bit of room in between each other and make them wear the mask. You're going to have to wear the mask to lower the percentages of people catching diseases that somebody else may already have. And it's not just going to be that way in theaters. It's going to be that way in ball games. It's going to be that way. I wouldn't even begin to open up a swimming pool right now. A swimming pool there's no way to confine people, social distancing in a swimming pool. Now, if it's a skating ring, that's different. But a pool where you're slobbering, you got water going in and out of your nostrils, in and out of your mouth, in and out of other orifices in your body, no way. There's no way that I would open up swimming pools right now. Same way with churches. Instead of having everybody sit confined, elbow to elbow, where you just squeeze them in there like a bunch of pickles, have them confined to where they separate. You want at least one person space in between that other person, and that's providing that everybody's clean, that's providing everybody's sanitized, and that's providing everybody's wearing a mask. Because this stuff is serious. It does have a large death toll. And it is extremely toxic. In other words, if you catch it, it could be the last thing that you catch in your entire life. And as far as how quick that you can catch it, oh yeah, you can catch it real quick. So yeah, there's going to be some social changes in the next 6 months to a year, possibly a year and a half, before we'll ever even begin to start thinking about going back to normal. If we're going to survive this, if we're going to tough this out, if we're going to be able to live through this 5 years from now and say, wow, wasn't that something to have to go through all of that? You know, it's one thing to have to live through this. It's one thing to have to live through that. Will I live through this election? Will I remember whenever this occurred? I remember whenever 9/11 happened. I remember whenever the racial tension rose in the LA Rodney King riots. I remember whenever the school shootings was happening. I remember whenever the church got attacked. I remember whenever the idiot kicked out the window in Las Vegas. I remember the Orlando nightclub getting shot up. I remember the space shuttle blowing up. I remember this happening. And it's another thing to actually live through something that you've lived through. Did you hear what I said? It's another thing to live through something that you've lived through. To just talk about something that you've seen, witnessed, or lived through, that's on a completely different level than you actually experiencing it. Because I guarantee you, the people in New York City that lived through 9/11 will have a much, much different testimony in the particulars towards where they was, what they was doing, what they went through. And some of them will have a horrifying testimony towards what they seen, what they witnessed, what they had to experience. And some of them, it has literally costed them lives because they was at the wrong place at the wrong time whenever that event took place. Kind of like the fires out west. You know, it's one thing to say, okay, I lived through the blazing fires out west that ravaged California. And it's another thing to actually live in one of those communities out there and say, you know what? I really did live through that fire. In other words, we was the ones that had the house that was on this side of the hillside that was consumed, and it burned everything that we ever even thought about having. Your testimony becomes more dynamic if you actually live through the event, other than just saying that you lived through the event. And there's going to be a lot of people that's going to remember this. This will be one right here, honey child, that'll go down in the history books towards people never forgetting what the heck this was all about pertaining to a pandemic. And I'm sure if you could go back in time, and if you could raise up the people that was living during other extreme events, regardless whether it was the Spanish flu or whatever, I'm sure that their testimony would be just as powerful and just as impactful as those who are living through what they're living through right now. It's serious. It's not Hollywood. This is just as real as it gets towards reality.
Tonight, New York City's mayor is urging residents to lower expectations for the summer, saying it's too soon to tell when sporting events, beaches, and public gatherings might resume. Lester?
All right, Gabe, thank you. And we can't emphasize enough the magnitude of the crisis within this crisis. We're talking about the devastating losses growing at the country's nursing homes, leaving thousands of families heartbroken and furious. Here's Kate Snow.
In New Jersey, where 95% of the state's long-term care facilities have coronavirus, a gruesome discovery. Authorities say they found 17 bodies crammed inside a small morgue at the state's largest nursing home.
I am also outraged that bodies of the dead were allowed to pile up in a makeshift morgue at the facility. New Jerseyans living in our long-term care facilities deserve to be cared for with respect, compassion, and dignity. We can and must do better.
A congressman got a frantic call from Andover Subacute and Rehabilitation on Saturday.
She asked for help with extra body bags because they were out. There was such, a crisis mode.
An owner told NBC News the heroic healthcare staff has been working relentlessly to contain the virus. Lee Rapash's 84-year-old mother died there 3 weeks ago.
They told us there were no cases originally, and then to find out later that this COVID-19 was basically running rampant in the nursing home.
That facility has been reported to police before. One owner was an executive of a troubled family-run nationwide chain NBC News investigated last summer.
And they tried to transfer me to the nurse's station, but the nurse's station is just so inundated.
Families across the country are desperate for information about their loved ones in facilities. NBC News now counts more than 5,600 deaths at more than 3,400 facilities nationwide. In Florida, nursing homes are petitioning the governor to protect them against lawsuits from families. After 7 deaths at Atria Willowwood, Florida's governor worried that employees were showing up for work with COVID symptoms.
You had people that were sick that should not have been in. That's for sure.
The facility responding that the governor's comments were inaccurate and unproductive and inconsistent with substantial and urgent steps being taken.
Staffing is the number one issue right now. Many of them are making close to minimum wage. I think there's a real feeling that, hey, this is not what I signed up to do.
The agency that runs Medicare saying it's working with the CDC to get better data and will have more information soon. Not soon enough for Sheila Curran, whose husband died.
I want more information. I want more transparency. Yeah. I want people to own up to their part in this. And I want him back.
Kate Snow, NBC News.
Now to the staggering economic toll. New numbers today show tens of millions of Americans out of work in just 1 month, as hundreds of thousands of small business owners desperately wait for new loan funding that could help keep them afloat. Here's Jolene Kent.
Tonight, the long lines at food banks reflecting the grim reality for millions of Americans left jobless and hungry, many for the first time. More than 5 million workers filed for unemployment benefits last week, pushing the total to a catastrophic 22 million out of work in just 1 month. That's more than the populations of 48 states, including Florida and New York. The sudden unemployment surge wiping out virtually all jobs added since the financial crisis 11 years ago.
I was laid off.
Serena Yanez is a single mother in Oregon. She applied for unemployment after being laid off from her job at a travel company.
It's just the waiting game that's really unsettling for a lot of us, because I honestly don't know when that check will be coming.
Among the states hardest hit, California, Georgia, Texas, and Michigan, where 25% of the workforce is without a job, the highest percentage in the country.
What is the office doing to make sure that unemployed people can get their benefits in a timely fashion?
I don't think any state system was set up to handle a pandemic. We're throwing everything we can at processing these claims. We're not going to rest until we do.
In New Orleans, Ruth and Stephen Yamada say even with unemployment benefits, it's hard to make ends meet.
Our unemployment checks don't even begin to cover our monthly expenses.
And the layoffs are not letting up. Best Buy furloughing 51,000 workers this week, and Disney another 43,000 this coming weekend. As unemployed workers muster all their hope to get through this, a simple message.
I just hope that people take this seriously so that we can all get back to work.
Jolene Kent, NBC News, Los Angeles.
This is Stephanie Rule. Small business owners still trying to apply for forgivable loans are being turned away because the government's Paycheck Protection Program is out of money. After a chaotic start, more than 14 years' worth of loans were processed in less than 14 days. But it wasn't enough. Before the economy was in free fall, these small business owners were already worried.
It's hard stuff.
It's painful for me to think about these families that I'm responsible for.
We're down about 80%. My fear is that these doors won't open and the people won't come through.
That's exactly what happened when stay-at-home orders went into effect. Now, with the $350 billion exhausted, the push to add another $250 billion is stalled in Congress. Democrats insisting on new wording after criticism those who needed the loans most were not prioritized. Still, to meet the full demand, experts say the price tag will be significantly higher. Danny Koch owns the Town Shop in New York. He has 28 employees.
It's devastating. I was acting on good faith and paying my employees.
He says he had no idea the application window would close so quickly.
The one little piece of the puzzle that was possibly going to keep everyone going and keep everyone afloat is now gone.
Danny Moe owns a barbershop in Harlem. His application has not been approved.
If I don't get the loan, I can probably last till May. I really don't even want to think about that.
Alex Perry, who owns a commercial sign company in Chicago, just got word he was one of the nearly 1.7 million loans approved.
It was day to day, almost hour to hour that I was worrying about the business. And now, just almost like, snap of a finger, I feel much more confident.
Deborah Miller's loan was also just approved, but she's using donations and personal savings to pay 10 of the employees at her catering company to make free meals for hospital workers and first responders.
It's a win-win. We're giving work to our employees as well as feeding those frontline people.
If you have applied for a Paycheck Protection loan and haven't been approved, contact your lender and make sure all your paperwork is in order. That way, if the funds get replenished, and there's a good chance they will be, you'll be ready. Lester?
All right, Stephanie, thanks. We'll be back in 60 seconds with the urgent new warning about the damage coronavirus may do to the brain, the symptoms everyone needs to pay attention to.
Suffering from lung failure filled ICUs in New York.
Plan. Back now with new signs that coronavirus can have harmful effects on the body beyond the lungs, in some cases impacting the brain. We get more on that now from Stephanie Gosk.
In March, while COVID patients suffering from lung failure filled ICUs in New York City, doctors at Mount Sinai noticed an alarming spike in something else: strokes.
We saw an unprecedented increase in the number of large vessel stroke patients coming into the health system.
45 in a 4-week period, nearly triple the normal number, according to neurosurgeon Dr. Joanna Fifi. Half of the patients had COVID and were, on average, 12 years younger than typical stroke victims.
How surprising is that? It was very surprising. Everybody on the team noticed it and said there has to be a correlation with COVID and stroke.
There are still so many unanswered questions about this debilitating virus. Among them, what is it doing to the brain? A limited study of 214 COVID patients in China found more than a third suffered neurological symptoms. The most common, loss of taste and smell, dizziness, headaches, even unconsciousness, and in rare instances, strokes.
I just can't tell you how wonderful my father was.
Nicole Hutcherson, a nurse, says alarm bells went off when she visited her 82-year-old, usually active dad, and he seemed almost sedated.
It was like he was confused, or he just wasn't in there. His eyes were just blank.
He was diagnosed with COVID. Within days, he passed away. It's unclear if he had a stroke. Now his brain is part of a study looking at neurological damage from the virus.
He would have wanted to help whoever he could help.
At Mount Sinai, they have started giving blood thinners to some virus patients to prevent strokes.
We had a patient who was 33 years old and previously healthy, and she developed symptoms of...
What they're talking about right now, I recognized in an 83-year-old woman. A good friend of mine up in Nashville, Tennessee, by the name of Bobby Sue Throneberry. Whenever I was up in Nashville, Tennessee, helping with the tornado damage, give or take about right at about a week after the tornadoes actually impoverished the area up towards Nashville, it was March the 6th whenever I come back from helping in the tornado damage, being up there for a couple of days, and I stopped off at Miss Bobby Sue's to be able to pick up a couple of those clothes because she had made arrangements towards washing a couple loads of my clothes while I was out there doing what I was doing towards humanitarian work. It was about a week later till I finally got to that hamper of clothes, and I remembered who it was that helped me fold those clothes, and I made a telephone call to Miss Bobby Sue. This was the final last time that I ever talked to her. I could tell by talking to her, just as these people are talking about, how that she seemed like that she was sedated. I could tell that her voice, she's always had a rattle in her voice because she had a bad tumor that she had an operation on, but she did not sound the same. She did not respond the same. She did not. It was almost a frightful thing to hear her being completely out of character, in sync towards the old person that I was familiar with on the telephone versus the way that she was. And of course, I didn't want to raise a red flag to her in the regards towards, Bobby Sue, you don't sound too good. Maybe you need to go to the doctor. In which maybe I should have had, but I didn't want to get her all upset. So I just kind of eased off on the conversation, didn't have a whole lot to say, and hung the phone up. That was, give or take, about the probably around the 11th or 12th, maybe the 14th of March. I waited about 2 more weeks, and I had a gut feeling that something had happened to her. And I started calling about every other day, till finally I knew that her son was in intensive care and in recovery during the time that I was up there, till finally I looked her name up on the biography in Nashville in Davidson County, because I knew that she had such of a unusual name that if something did like that happen, it would show up. And sure enough, March the 16th, she was dead. She was pronounced dead. And a few days later, they buried her in Lynchburg, Tennessee, down by Jack Daniel's distillery, where she was originally from and where she raised up the family. Now, since then, I have contacted the funeral home and I've given my condolences, and I wanted to speak to her son. His name is Max. They call him Max. He actually has a legal name that I'd rather not gesture over the over my recording right now on my YouTube channel. But I left a message for him to get back with me, and so far he hasn't. Keep in mind, he was in recovery. He had had 2 massive heart attacks January the 1st, and something else had occurred during the time that he was up there, and he was having a horrible, horrible time. So I don't know if something has happened to him to the point that he can't call, or just don't feel like calling, or he may be past now, because he was substance of being in a hot zone during the time that he was in recovery up in Nashville, because they had a lot of cases of COVID-19. But what this woman is talking about pertaining to her loved ones sounded like that they was intoxicated. I'll back it up real quick so you can listen to it. Was the very same thoughts that I had while I was talking to her over the telephone.
Went off when she visited,
which would have been the final and last time.
Her 82-year-old, usually active dad, and he seemed almost sedated.
Almost sedated. That would be the category that I put Bobby Sue in whenever I made the telephone call, give or take around the 11th, 12th, 14th of March. She sounded like that she was almost sedated, like she had been drinking, or maybe she was drugged up. She was in horrible, despair. And I didn't realize her horrible despair because I only talked to her maybe a minute, minute and a half, 2 minutes at the very most. But I talked to her enough to tell her, Miss Bobby Sue, I'm just now getting around to folding these clothes up. And while I was folding these clothes up, I just thought I'd holler at you and tell you I appreciate you washing and folding these clothes up for me. You know, it was just something quick, sudden. Wasn't nothing talking about nothing serious. Wasn't nothing talking about business. I think I did ask how his her son Maxie. Well, he's doing better, but he's still up in recovery. We didn't even talk about the weather. We didn't talk about nothing other than we hit the highlights, and that was it, and we hung up. But I could tell, while talking to her, she did not sound right. That is a strong indication that something is going on with somebody. And I was told 2 days ago, I don't know how true it is, that if you cannot take a deep breath and hold it for at least 10 to 15 seconds without bogging down or choking down, that's another strong indication that you're at the brink of fixing to have an episode with the coronavirus, with COVID-19. Because I'm hearing cases where people actually go into the emergency room and in less than an hour, they're hooked up to a breathing machine, and less than 24 hours later or 48 hours later, they're dead. Because it attacks the lung structure and makes the lungs basically collapse up onto themselves. It's a horrible, horrible way to die.
It was like he was confused, or he just wasn't in there. His eyes were just blank.
He was diagnosed with COVID. Within days, he passed away. It's unclear if he had a stroke. Now his brain is part of a study looking at neurological damage from the virus.
He would have wanted to help whoever he could help.
At Mount Sinai, they have started giving blood thinners to some virus patients to prevent strokes.
We had a patient who is 33 years old and previously healthy, and she developed symptoms of arm weakness and numbness, and she stayed at home for over a day with the symptoms before calling 911. Because she waited, she will have to deal with some long-term complications.
The young woman didn't want to catch the virus in the ER. She didn't realize that she already had it. Stephanie Gosk, NBC News, New York.
In the search for solutions tonight, as the federal and state governments struggle to ramp up testing, companies are beginning to map out what it will take to safely bring their employees back to work. Here's Tom Costello.
With America shut down from Main Street to Wall Street, parked planes, shuttered warehouses, and factories, American business is tonight asking not just when, but how to restart.
If the recovery is not done in a thoughtful and responsible way, it would not only cost lives, but it would deepen the economic crisis.
Now, corporate America is considering what yet another new normal might look like. Despite some employee protests that it's not doing enough, Amazon says it's already providing masks and checking employee temperatures. A next step might be regular testing of all employees, including those showing no symptoms. With Whirlpool employees staying at home, the company says it's exploring technology solutions to allow employees to pre-certify that they are without symptoms before they come to work. But so far, only 3.2 million people have been tested for COVID-19 out of 328 million Americans. Another test to see if someone has the COVID antibodies and should have immunity is only starting to roll out. Microsoft founder Bill Gates, now a global health advocate, says widespread testing is the key to reopening the economy.
If we get our act together countrywide, that those get into place, by early June, we'll be looking at some type of opening up.
If an employee were to test positive for antibodies, they could be cleared to work. If they have signs of the illness, they'd be sent home along with anyone else with whom they'd had contact.
Inevitably, at some point this summer, we're going to start reintroducing activity before we have everything we want.
Among the unanswered questions, how will employers safeguard employees and their medical privacy? And do coworkers have an automatic right to know if somebody tests positive? Lester?
Right. Tom Costello, thanks. Up next, the return of sports with no fans. The new plan's underway tonight. A legend of the stage and screen has died. Brian Dennehy, who starred in films like First Blood, Cocoon, and Tommy Boy, and had numerous television roles. On the stage, he won 2 Tonys, including one for Death of a Salesman. His family said he died from natural causes, not related to COVID-19. He was 81. Back to our coronavirus coverage now, and with all the talk about reopening the country, sports leagues are planning their comebacks. But what might that new normal look like for fans and athletes? Here's Miguel Almaguer.
The moments that best define professional sports are now replaced by the deafening silence of our new reality. For the game to go on, fans must stay home, at least for now. Today, the PGA Tour announcing they'll resume play in June, but without crowds that line fairways and that make victories so memorable. The return to glory. Even America's pastime is looking to a new future. Major League Baseball batting around the idea of league play in Arizona, with players isolating in hotels and no one in the stands.
The lifeblood of Major League Baseball, its fans will be missing.
It happened for a single game in 2015 during civil unrest in Baltimore. With the NFL and NBA also in contact with the White House, Florida's governor is calling for NASCAR to get back on track, at least on TV. The NHL commissioner says hockey games during a pandemic would need a new sound.
At minimum, we're going to have to pump sound into the arena because hockey in a quiet, environment, the two don't go hand in hand.
Here in Los Angeles, the mayor says stadiums like this one will likely be empty until next year. And even when it's safe for athletes to return, fans will likely have a view.
That's sad, because that one stadium right there probably cost the taxpayers from the size of it. It probably cost $400,000 or $500,000. $400 or $500 million. $400 or $500 million is what it cost to purchase that piece of ground and to make that stand, to put all that up. $300 to $500 million stands are going to go empty without a large audience, unless they do like I said. But even at that, they're still going to be brushing up against one another. How many times have you been to a ball game and all of a sudden you turn around and you got a Coke and popcorn in your hand, and all of a sudden, boom, bam, and you bump into that person. Oh, I'm sorry, I spilled some of my Coke, or there went a third of my popcorn. How many times have you done that? There's really no way for you not to be within arm's distance of a person, and even closer whenever you're tightly confined like that. It doesn't matter if it's a concert. It doesn't matter if it's a church event. It doesn't matter if it's a ball game. Even the best of plans between man and beast sometimes go astray, pertaining to bringing people out together too suddenly before you have some sort of a antidote, some sort of vaccination against this pandemic. It could intensify. The second wave could actually be worse than the first if they do not have a way of screening people and knowing who has it that is susceptible in transferring it over to people, because there's a certain window that after you've been exposed, I think it's about a 2-week window, that even though you may not be showing harsh symptoms, you're still a carrier. You're still carrying it, to the point that if you do carry it to the wrong person and they get it, you could cause their death. So there has to be a way to identify who has it, to be able to identify if you're a carrier. That way you'll know to stay away from large audiences. the way it stands right now, we really don't know who has it, who don't have it, who's susceptible of getting it. And because of it being so new, we're having to do what we're doing right now towards everybody basically hunkering down. I'm sure eventually somebody will figure out something towards what to do or what not to do, just like they're talking about right now. They may have a game and there may not be fans out there hooping and hollering.
Like they've never seen before. Lester?
A strange new world. Miguel, thanks. Up next, how this 99-year-old veteran helped raise millions to fight the virus.
Lead to death.
Every morning. What happens then? A special donation for those on the front lines, how these face shields are helping one man's legacy live on.
And the impact COVID-19 is having on farmers and how that could impact you. Plus, a look at your weekend forecast.
That's all I had at 6.
Finally, we have to tell you the story of the World War II veteran raising millions to fight coronavirus. Molly Hunter on his epic journey without ever leaving his garden.
Captain Tom Moore had been to battle, but never like this. The 99-year-old World War II vet set out to raise $1,200 for healthcare workers walking laps in his garden.
They're the front line who are doing the battling, and we're all behind, giving them a little pat on the back.
Well, this is a lot more than a pat on the back.
His goal, walk 100 laps by his 100th birthday, April 30th. But within days, he raced past $5 million, then 10, then 15.
It was unbelievable.
On Thursday, he walked the last 25 laps with a guard of honor by his side as healthcare workers cheered, and the rest of us got just what we needed.
A little bit of glow and a little bit of sunshine.
Molly Hunter, NBC News, London.
Hallelujah. God bless his soul for raising that money for all them people. God bless him. The spirit lives on, doesn't it? It sure does. God bless his soul. Good for him. Wow. If we all had that type of enthusiasm, what could or would we be able to do with the world? Hallelujah for him. That'll be all for tonight. And I just pray for the victims of those who are entrapped and are struggling with health issues, such as myself, that may end up being susceptible of catching this disease. Good luck to all of us. Good luck to each and every one of us, and thanks for listening. Shalom.